The awakened management officer was shocked and congratulated Suho for successfully registering as an awakened. She asked the young man, how was he able to raise his stats so high in just one day? But the boy only asked in response, was he definitely considered an F-class druid as stated on his ID card? The girl said that with this card, he would be able to open an account and even make credit transactions. It also gave him a gift in the form of a new phone, on which he would be able to download the awakened control apps, and he would have access to the mercenary exam schedule and hunting information. The girl also excitedly started telling him that if he accumulated interdimensional energy by hunting monsters, he would be able to rise to E-class. Then he would be able to get a pension from the government, and many more various benefits. Then she said that she hoped he would work hard for the good of humanity. And as the guy was about to leave, she remembered, and clarified if he knew how to open the status bar. Due to a recent system error, the status bar has changed its interface. So those fatal errors were most likely not due to a change in power, but due to an update in all the awakened. A large panel opened in front of the guy, on which the graphs and characteristics of his strength were written. Despite leveling up to the awakened stage, the scores of the individual stats were very low, showing that all the stats increased unevenly during the hunt. Junho was driving a truck while listening to music when Suho called him. He answered the call with the speakerphone on, and congratulated his brother for getting the phone and checking in for the awakened one. The older one said that he had already arrived at the hunting site, and then the younger one said that he would soon finish with the last delivery, and would come to see him right after that. He then asked if Suho would take the mercenary exam, but the elder said he wanted to help him pay off his debt first. Junho then said that an awakened with F grade would have a hard time fighting monsters at first, and at those words, Suho abruptly hung up the phone. At times, he doubted that the awakened one was definitely his brother, because his character had changed completely, and he was completely different from his former self, except for his appearance. Suho headed towards Namyaju Gate, where the monster bonus listed on the awakened one's application was given out. A traffic jam of hunters' vehicles had formed at the entrance of the field. Among them was the Scylla Guild, which was a very successful team of hunters. There were 3 newcomers sitting in the back seats who were very afraid of their first trip to the dungeon, but their leaders sitting in the front seats told them not to fear anything, for they were awakened and very strong. In fact, both men were disappointed in the younger generation who were so pampered and afraid of any rustle. Suho walked past the cars to the checkpoint, providing his license. Even though he didn't have a car or equipment, the military had no reason not to let him pass, and as he walked through the passage, the other hunters laughed, thinking that this newcomer was a real daredevil, or just very stupid. And although this meal and the dungeon were not low-level in difficulty, without weapons, he was not a survivor. However, the guy interested the head of the Scylla Guild squad, and when they passed through the checkpoint, he commanded his comrade to follow Suho. But as soon as they passed the tunnel wall, the young man disappeared from their sight, as if vaporized. And then the man thought that they had caught a big fish, since this guy can hide so skillfully and goes to the field without any weapons, not like the cowardly rookies. Meanwhile, Suho decided to check his running speed, and after running a considerable distance through the forest in this area, he realized that he really wasn't as strong as he was in that world, because there he could run for hours and even days without stopping. But now he was only able to run for a few minutes. His weakened body required regular hard workouts. Standing among the trees to catch his breath, he suddenly heard some men threatening others with weapons. Apparently, a stabbing match was going on somewhere. The chance to compete with the awakened, rather than with monsters, enticed the gambling young man, and he went to the sounds of the fight. 2 teams, in different uniforms, apparently belonging to 2 respectable guilds, clutched their blood-stained swords together. Each of them managed to stab the other, but not severely, so they continued to stand on their feet, but no one dared to go further than the cuts, so the fight did not continue, and only a series of insults and threats about bloodthirsty killing that no one had done so were hurled in everyone's face. Looking at this, Suho realized that it was just a bunch of cowards who were playing and not fighting, and was about to leave, when suddenly the leader of the group that had surrounded the second group got out of the car, and from their side came more threats, as well as statements that their leader was very intimidating, and as soon as they heard his name, they would immediately surrender. Their leader was a big, pumped-up man with the face of a real thug, named Choi Gu-shik. The awakened authority and the police promised to give 4,000 for his head to whoever could catch him. Suho's eyes lit up when he heard about the reward, and the cornered guild asked that if they put down their weapons, let Choi Gu-shik let them go. He, man, stretching his joints, didn't want to let the unfortunate ones go, because then it would be too boring, and he was going to have fun by beating them up a lot. He ran towards the hunters as Suho suddenly jumped on top of them with his hands in his pockets, leaving dents in the asphalt after his feet. For a moment, Gu-shik was a little scared, but when he came to his senses, he asked the guy who he was and why was he climbing up to them. Suho then replied that he was just a guy in need of money, so he was going to capture him and get the promised bonus. Choi Gu-shik's subordinates thought the guy was crazy, but their leader just laughed. He then left Suho with the help of gravity, as he stared into his eyes for longer than 5 seconds. His body became numb, and he couldn't move his limbs, nor could he take even a single step. The bandit's eyes burned blood red, and he ordered his subordinates to deal with the boy, and they ran at him with swords. But suddenly, Suho managed to rest his fist on Gu-shik's cheek, overcoming the shackles from which no victim of the bandit could escape. Then, a beastly grin that showed bloodlust appeared on Suho's face, and he struck the man with great force with his second fist. Suho was curious to feel the effects of the other awakened one's magic, but overcoming gravity, he aimed his fist at Gu-shik, which stopped a couple of centimeters away from the man as he applied a mental shackles spell that imposed an even greater daze. Choi Gu-shik called Suho an unusual type, and then jumped at him with a knife, but the guy managed to hit him in the face with his knee, breaking his nose, and dodged the knife. He then asked the man if there was nothing he could do but mentally shackle him and hit his broken face with his fist. Suho then grabbed the victim by his shirt, flipped him over himself, and slammed him into the wall. Gu-shik was defeated, and the guy called him a lowlife. The guild team that was surrounded by the bandits were shocked to see who was able to take down this famous thug so easily, and began to tell Suho that there was also a cash prize for the heads of the other gang members. The druid asked the hunters to give them some rope or fishing line if they had any, and then tied Gu-shik up so he couldn't get out. When the bound man woke up, he saw his subordinates throwing their weapons on the ground, and with tears in their eyes they sat on their knees, begging pitifully to be spared, and in truth, no prize was given for their heads, and they were under the power of Choi Gu-shik only out of fear, but in truth, they hated him. Then they became bold and began to insult their leader to his face, thinking that in this way they would be believed and they could escape. But Suho was not so naive and said that even if they acted out of fear, they had still committed many crimes, and they would be handed over to the police anyway, even if there were no rewards, which was of course not true, and there was indeed a price on everyone's head. Seeing that Gu-shik had woken up, Suho kicked him in the face with his shoe, then knocked out the others and tied them up with ropes as well. The team he saved offered to drive the bandits in their van, which was the least they could do to thank him for saving them, since they couldn't have handled them themselves. They said they owed him their lives, but the young man cared nothing for such oaths. The team leader behind the wheel then asked Suho what skills he possessed, and then told about his own. He possessed sword art, chase, and scouting. Sword art was his main skill as an awakened one, and he learned the other two while studying the skill book. Hearing about the book, Suho was very surprised because he didn't know that in addition to innate skills, awakened ones could acquire additional skills with training. Then the hunting team was surprised that he didn't know anything about it, and then they asked his rank, and when they heard that he was an F-class rookie, they were amazed that he was able to defeat Choi Gu-shik and his gang so easily. Suho then pondered, thinking that he would like to learn the basics of battle magic techniques if such could be learned, such as Gu-shik's mental shackles. They passed by a portal, and when the druid asked about it, the driver said that it was a low-level first-level dungeon that was their goal for today's trek. And then Suho said that he would need to go there as well when he got his mercenary license. With his words, he once again stunned the team who didn't know that he wasn't even a full-fledged hunter, in addition to having only recently awakened. The Strength Guild came out of the portal. The newcomers were injured and could barely walk on their own feet, holding on to each other. They asked the military doctor to help them, and then the leader began to shout that apparently licenses were being given out to everyone now, and he needed to personally check the staff at the Awakened department to see who was interviewing them, since these newcomers had almost died in the initial low-level dungeon. If this continued, the entire new generation of hunters would just be cannon fodder, and at the higher levels of dungeons, they wouldn't be able to return alive. Their leader's assistant tried to calm him down, to be more lenient to the newcomers, and understood the current situation of the guild, which in any case needed new faces, so they had no choice, and had to accept the weak ones into their ranks as well. The current reality was that anyone who had rich parents who were willing to buy a license for their children could become an Awakened, because thanks to this, they received a good income, a pension, regardless of the inheritance of their parents, as well as a higher status, which any youth at any time aspired to. Such rich people chose to hunt in small groups, communicating with each other by microphones, and hunted according to special tactics. With the help of a broker, they would obtain a living monster, which they would chain up and then cut up like cattle. Then they would catch the mercenaries and take a bus to the dungeon, where they would raise their level. And like that, they would brazenly participate in missions without fighting, and then, as they leveled up through teamwork with professional mercenaries, they would join elite guilds, earning even more money and status for themselves and their parents. If they were suddenly attacked by monsters, the mercenaries and other team members simply became victims to be devoured while the majors tried to escape. The leader was angry at the corrupt society where everything was decided by money. His aide told him to relax and accept the way the world was, and offered to have a shot of soju with him in their camp tent. The Force Guild worked in concert with the military, who patrolled near them in military vehicles. One of the soldiers, Captain Jiang, approached the guild leader, calling him by his first name, Kang Min-hyuk, and reported that they had been handed 10 bandits rampaging through the field. Among the bandits was a C-class ranker, Choi Gu-shik, with a very bad reputation. His gang was attacking other hunters and extorting their prey. However, this bandit was able to be caught by an F-ranked rookie and brought him along with the team of hunters the gang attacked. This rookie hadn't even passed the mercenary registration, and hearing those words, the leader was surprised. The captain said he didn't believe it, but the words of all the eyewitnesses confirmed that he was the one who caught him. This scoundrel was loaded with a broken nose, a crushed cheekbone, and 4 skewed ribs. Then the leader realized that apparently this guy was the rookie who had come through the checkpoint without a car or equipment, and then disappeared from their sight. He asked the soldier where the young man had gone, at which point he replied that the guy had gone through a portal. To find this strong rookie, leader Min-hyuk alone went back to the dungeon to find Su-ho and recruit him into the ranks of his guild. Before heading into the portal himself, Min-hyuk regained his wits and ran to the dispatcher. The dispatcher was near one of the military vehicles and was monitoring the hunters in the dungeons through the computer. The guild leader asked him, in the dungeon under which door did the guy who captured Choi Gu-shik go to? Su-ho went through the portal with the leader of the team he saved from the bandits. They gave him a knife and also handed him special clothes, without which it was impossible to go into the dungeon. Su-ho was surprised that he felt no pain when teleporting, and the borrowed clothes remained on his body. The team captain then explained that it was impossible to pass through the portal with things made of matter containing spatial energy. But their uniforms are made from materials found in the dungeon, so they can pass through in it without a problem. It looks plain and looks like a closed tracksuit, but it costs over 2 million won and is indispensable. After passing through the portal, several translucent energy doors opened between the two guys. Behind each of them was a different dungeon. The portal they passed through contained 38 doors. When entering the portal, they would check with the dispatcher to see which specific door they could pass through, according to their level, rank, and the number of hunters there for the sweep. The partners passed through the 24th door, which instantly disappeared behind their backs. When Su-ho asked why it disappeared, the team captain said that it would reappear when they defeated the strongest monsters. Su-ho prostrated himself, and telling his friend that he would be back soon, ran so hard that he disappeared from sight after a couple of seconds. At that time, the guy thought that his new friend didn't have any scouting skills, and could easily get lost and not find his way back if the dungeon was completely cleared. But he couldn't clear it all alone. Even though he easily defeated the dangerous bandit, he couldn't deal with the high-level bosses, because after all, his rank was only F. The captain activated the scouting ability, and ran towards Su-ho to help him get back. The dispatcher looked at the door data on the computer and informed squad leader Min-hyuk that the door Su-ho was behind had already closed. The squad leader was angry because he didn't enter the door in time to catch up with the newcomer, so there was nothing left for him to do but wait for him to return from the dungeon. Su-ho easily chopped the goblins with his new knife and was very happy with how the weapon felt in his hand. It was much better than his homemade daggers from the other world, even though they had served him for centuries. He pulled the mask over his nose to avoid the smell of blood and poison from the monsters' bodies and began to cut up the corpses. But he could only get one heliotrope. But he wasn't discouraged about the hunt, as he had already received a very good bonus for catching the criminals. Now it was much more important to earn points for level-ups and individual stats, as well as gaining skills. The captain followed the bloody trail of corpses, and with the help of the ability to see further, tracked Su-ho's further trajectory, and continued to run towards him. With the accumulated 102 points, Su-ho could acquire 2 skills. The first was called Taming the Beast, and the second was Summoning the Tree Spirit. He acquired the first skill, and while he was clicking on the ability panels, 2 goblins fell from the tree onto him. The druid easily chopped the carcasses in half and leveled up, gaining an achievement of 545 points, thanks to the power of taming the beast. However, the characterization panel once again gave a fatal error, and afterwards required additional synchronization to upgrade. His overall level became 2nd, and his accumulated points reached 345. Individual characteristic points had also increased, much to the hunter's delight. He pressed the Summoning Tree Spirit skill, channeling 100 points into it, and decided to immediately use this ability. A small glowing fairy appeared in front of him. Seeing the fairy, he remembered that they had met before, on that planet. He was walking in the forest then, and mistook the spirit for one of the fireflies, thinking that the mystical creature was just a dream. He ordered the tree spirit to survey and scan the area, and the fairy flew inland to track down the goblins. The spirit used this ability to read the memory of trees and other plants in the immediate area. However, due to the low level of its host, the process was very slow. Su-ho got tired of waiting for the tree spirit and looked at the status bar once again. He was offered 2 more abilities, namely scouting and tracking. He bought both skills with his remaining points, and with his hands on the ground, he began to scan the area, which came out faster than the fairies. It was amazing that he was able to get these abilities so easily when other hunters had to learn them with special books. Perhaps it was a matter of his druid division, and he could easily understand the forest and other terrains with good hearing and fast running, derived from another dimension. While scouting, he sensed the strength of a very powerful and strong goblin who was the dungeon boss, and ran towards him, anticipating the hunt. The large goblin guided his knife towards the captain's throat, dropping him to the ground. Su-ho asked his comrade what he was doing here, for he had said he would go hunting on his own. The fellow replied that he was worried about him, for he might not be able to handle the number of monsters and get lost, but now he was asking for help himself. Hearing the request for help, Su-ho jumped up on the rock he was standing on and kicked the goblin with both feet sideways, pushing it away from the shield the monster was using to cover itself. The goblin rolled over and fell to the ground, but immediately jumped up, threatening the sword and shield. However, the weapons did not save the monster, and Su-ho easily kicked it in the lower jaw, sealing it into the rock, and then stabbed his blade into its heart. The strongest goblin was defeated, and the dungeon was completely cleaned up, so the door opened, and after clearing the remaining corpses, the 2 guys returned back to Earth. When Su-ho, along with his new comrade, came out of the portal, the dispatcher and the rest of the military were shocked at the record sweep time. No one had ever come out of this dungeon so early, much less a newcomer. Su-ho made his way to the locker room, promising to return his protective suit, and when he left the room, he was caught by Kang Min-hyuk, who introduced himself as the leader of the 27th Strike Unit of the Scylla Guild, and asked the young man to spare a moment. After all the hunting, they went to a cafe where they started drinking coffee from cups. The man asked the hunter to join their guild, where he would be given a better environment to develop his abilities. After sipping his drink, Su-ho refused this favorable offer. Min-hyuk decided that the guy just realized the significance of his abilities and was padding his price so that the guild leader would offer more favorable points for him when working for Scylla. He said out loud that if Suho was being offered to join by other guilds as well, they would send him a formal documented offer, and then handed him his business card. The guy replied that it was pointless to keep calling him, because he wasn't going to work for anyone. Suho returned home, but didn't catch Junho, who should have already arrived from the delivery. He went up to the roof of the house and began to sunbathe on a wooden bench, deciding that his brother took his son for a walk, while the two of them had the chance to do so, while he himself tried to enjoy the sunny day. Granny came up to the roof and began to hang the laundry on the ropes. Suho got up from the bench and began to help her. While they were doing household chores, the woman asked the guy, "Is he really Junho's older brother, although he looks 10 years younger than him?" But after she answered her own question, she said that in these times, nothing should be surprised when people disappear. Disasters happen, and monsters swarm everywhere. Suho tried to explain that he was actually very old, and his aging was frozen in place, but the elderly old lady wouldn't listen to him. When Junho returned home with Gongwoo and the puppy, he saw that his older brother was waiting for him with an envelope in his hands. In that envelope was 50 million won. Suho told the man to go right now and pay back his debt, and if he had any money left in his pockets, have him buy a bottle of soju and meat so they could celebrate tonight. Junho had tears in his eyes. He did not know how to thank his brother, but he did not ask for thanks. And then the debtor went to the creditors. While his father was away, Gongwoo was playing with his uncle and the puppy. Suddenly, the puppy's characteristic bar appeared in front of Suho, which meant that even the animal could become awakened and could help when hunting beasts. The ability bar made a request for the puppy's name, and then the uncle and nephew began to think of a nickname. Gongwoo came up with the name Snowball, and the awakened one liked it, so he entered it into the electronic panel. Then they heard a truck parked downstairs, and the boy ran joyfully calling for his daddy. But Junho came out of the cab of the truck looking grim. His whole face was covered with blood, and his body was very weak. Instead of accepting his debt, the creditors had beaten him up, because they were not going to close the loan so early, as they wanted to make more money from the interest and charge him more money. Suho was very angry and called an ambulance for his brother. When it was deep into the evening, the lending company issuing instant loans without guarantees, Yongari summarized the daily reports to finish the workday. The head boss, a brunette man with a scar over his eye, was tallying up the debts of the main lenders when one of his subordinates walked quietly into the office from the hallway. His face was all bloody, and his eyes showed fear and terror. Then hands from the darkness grabbed his body and threw him with great force inside the office. The rest of the staff, pumped-up men in suits, each of whom was a real bandit, ran towards Suho to guard the boss, but the boss deftly struck them in their weak spots, causing them to fall to the floor without strength. The other bandits pulled out knives and threatened Suho that they weren't afraid of him, so he could safely approach them, and then they would finish him off. Suho easily picked up a metal table with one hand, leaving finger indentations on its surface, and turned it over, hitting the remaining employees of the loan company. He then threw several more punches, and when everyone was lying on the floor in their own blood, unconscious, only the head boss remained, and the assistant standing next to him. Suho grabbed a table and pressed the men down with it, pinning them at the waist, causing them to stop feeling their legs. The young man then stood on top of the table and crouched down, looming over the ringleader's face, asking his name, Kim Jong-soo? The man replied that it was him, at which point Suho began slapping him, sentencing him that how dare he not accept citizen Park Jun-hyun's fully repaid loan, and instead ordered his subordinates to beat him up. Teeth and clots of blood started flying out of the boss's mouth, so hard were the blows, and the guy kept condemning the company for working unfairly with their customers, and when those customers bring in a debt, they should politely thank them for their cooperation, close the loans, and say goodbye. He handed him an envelope of money, and then made all the thugs bow their foreheads to him on the floor, and threatened that if they didn't close his brother's debt, next time he would come to kill them all. The boss wanted to complain about this attack to the police, but realized that in that case, the truth about the reason for coming would come out, that they were extorting money and not closing loans to customers by keeping illegal records, and after realizing that they were beaten by the awakened one, decided to contact the guilds that were their debtors, as he didn't want to leave this humiliation for nothing, and wanted to destroy both brothers. Min-hyuk came to the Silla Guild headquarters, the Human Resources Department, and approached Deputy Pak with an important matter. He asked the staff member to look in the Awakened database for the newcomer Park Soo-ho, who had only registered as an Awakened person a day ago, and with an F rank had cleared the dungeon today in a short period of time. Deputy Park was also surprised to see this rookie, and then the supervisor asked him to find all the information about him. However, access to his activity sheet was unavailable, and it had to be opened using a hacking program. After seeing the activity sheet, they were amazed at the young man's sudden power surges and abilities, and then thought that he was definitely a secret government agent, as his personal information was classified so that no program could hack into it, and all the activity started quite recently. And for a whole 10 years there was no information about him, which meant that he was on secret missions, and that was why he refused to join any guilds. However, with that said, it wasn't clear why he decided to start a hunter's activity and raise his level starting from the initial low-level dungeons. Even though Deputy Park had told Min-hyuk to stay out of it since government business was involved, he still asked him to report the latest news about Soo-ho, despite his other extensive guild business and his work in the Human Resources Department. Soo-ho went to the hospital to see Jun-ho, who was on the mend, and brought him a heavy lunch bought from a fast food place. In a day, he was to have the bandage removed from his injured head and discharged. Junior asked Senior if he was going to join one of the guilds when he passed the mercenary exam, but he replied that after centuries in a world where he was the king of the forest, he wasn't going to be anyone's subordinate, and therefore planned to become a leader himself and create his own hunter's guild. This bold statement surprised the younger one very much, but there was no doubt about the older one's strength. Choi Soo-young was walking down the corridor of one of the floors of the Awakened Control Building. She was the same girl who had first discovered Soo-ho, who had come out of the portal. She was a mercenary, working directly for the government and the Awakened Department, and in addition to hunting, she dealt with atypical portals and other matters concerning the Awakened and the disappeared in the dungeons. The director came out of his office and called her to his office to talk to her. He asked the girl if she had any problems or difficulties in her work lately. The girl replied that there had been no problems, and then the headmaster started yelling at her, because the territory she was responsible for patrolling had already had 2 breakthroughs the other day, and if the bridge portal had opened yesterday, all of Seoul would have been left in ruins. Then the girl asked, "Why are they trying to pin all the problems on her? Aren't there capable awakened ones without her, who are also responsible for Seoul's portals?" Then the principal stopped speaking in a stern voice, and grabbed his head, and begged his best employee to do something about the breakthroughs, since the portal authorities were plaguing him with endless calls. But Soo-young was very tired from working long hours, and wanted to take a vacation. But after a dialogue with her boss, it turned out that he was going to deny her vacation request, and send her as an evaluator for the next mercenary exam. She crumpled up her issued invitation as an employee at the event, and walked unhappily down the hall. The headmaster shouted at her that this year she should not refuse the newcomers, as she had done in the past, when they had no time to show their talents, and were immediately kicked out of the exam. But the girl replied that only true professionals had the right to become mercenaries, not all the weak awakened who wanted to. The boss called her too stubborn, because she didn't use all her talents to the fullest extent, and she was often lazy, not wanting to be responsible. And even now, she didn't want to be an examiner, even though it was part of her duties. A huge line of the awakened lined up to be registered and admitted for the mercenary exam. They were in a large gymnasium where a curly-haired guy was sitting on the floor and was streaming on his phone, filming himself on the front camera, asking his subscribers to wish him luck on the exam, and as soon as he passed it, his channel would immediately start monster hunting content. One of the viewers had donated 20,000 won to him, and he thought that he had received that much just for promising to pass the exam. How much he would receive when he started streaming from the dungeons. Behind him sat Soo-ho, who had absolutely no idea what this guy was doing. And who was he talking to? Before he entered the forest for 1,000 years, he lived in 2015, where there were not yet so advanced smartphones and a large number of bloggers who created different kinds of streams. This kind of world was new to him, and he did not hide his curiosity. But the blogger did not like this pushy guy, and he thought he was a fool, and stepped aside to register. The chief inspector, who introduced himself as Major Kim Yoon-soo, spoke in front of him. Reading from a clipboard, he announced the rules, which stated that the names of each of the examinees would be called by lot, followed by the number of the inspector in charge of the squad, to which the one named would have to go and line up with his team in a row. There were several inspectors standing in front of the stage waiting for their squad. The director began to call each one's name, and the awakened began to hurriedly change places, to line up in the right order to their commander. The curly-haired blogger was called number 45, named Han Dong-soo, and together with Suho, who came after him, was assigned to the 15th squad, whose commander was Choi Soo-yeon, nicknamed the devil who throws everyone out of the exam. Suho recognized the blonde girl, and their gazes met. The girl froze, trying not to show him her emotions, while the curly-haired man was in utter despair, because now he was sure that he wouldn't be able to pass the exam. After the distribution, the participants were sent to rooms from which they were asked not to leave until the first test began. In these rooms, the participants were able to shower and change into their uniforms. The blogger sat sadly in the locker room, while the entire 15th squad was changing. Suho approached him and asked him why he was sad, as he had just recently been glowing with happiness. He snapped back and said that he didn't have to walk around with a smile on his face all the time. But then he explained that Inspector Soo-young was a very cruel examiner, and it was almost impossible to pass the test with her because she throws everyone out right away. Suho turned to him informally, even though he looked younger, and said that she definitely only kicked out the weak, but if you were strong and capable and confident in your abilities, then there was nothing to worry about. Such self-confidence and informal tone hurt the blogger, and he asked the druid if he was getting into a conflict, although he tried to support his teammate. But feeling the excitement, Suho called the streamer to a more appropriate place for a man-to-man conversation. They went to the gym where there was a large fist-fighting ring, and decided to have a fight on it. Dong-soo put himself above Suho, thinking he was a stupid weakling, and started bragging that he was a Notuber boxer who was famous on Explosive Brotherhood TV and had high hopes for him. But Suho didn't know who Notubers were, and looked at the braggart incomprehensibly. At this time, Soo-young went to her squad's rooms and found no one, but when she heard the commotion in the gym, she realized that something had happened there. The entire squad was watching the fight that was starting. Dong-soo kept waving his fists in the air and saying that it was his hobby to put the brains of fools like Suho in place, and he would knock him out with a single punch. But no sooner had he thrown a real punch than Soo-yeon burst into the gym and ordered the entire squad to go to their rooms and for the two troublemakers to stay put. When everyone was out, she walked over to the boxers and told them that the rules said she had to disqualify one of them, so she told them to continue fighting, and whoever loses would walk out of the exam. Curly looked towards Suho, who was walking towards him with a grim look, ready to fight. The blogger got into a stance and asked his opponent not to be angry at him when he won, but as soon as he threw a punch, it was immediately blocked, and then Suho landed his own straight to his jaw. Streamer passed out, falling to the ring floor with a single punch. He then approached Soo-young and asked her not to kick the guy out, provided he lost the fight to him. The girl was fine with sparring with the mysterious awakened man, and agreed to the deal. While watching him fight, the girl smelled an irregular, and before they started the fight between them, asked him if he was one, but the guy didn't understand the meaning of the word, and after asking, got no answer. Then the girl told him that upon his victory, she would fulfill one wish of his. Soo-young threw a lot of point strikes with her palms, applying oriental martial technique, and Suho barely had time to block the blows. At one point, panic appeared in his eyes, as there was no one equal to him in battle. Then the girl made another strong kick in the jaw, from which the druid was thrown aside, but before the inspector noticed how he had already moved, and was already on top, clinging to the high wall of the ring. He told her that he hadn't expected that kind of force, however it made it all that much more fun. He jumped to her side and the girl kicked his chest again. Then she wanted to step on him again, but the guy managed to dodge and the girl's foot hit the empty floor. He instantly stood up, and the inspector began to strike him again with her hands, which he silently blocked, and then blocked her new kick with his elbow. He was then about to strike her in the stomach, at which point the girl covered him with her hands, summoning the energy shield that was her awakened ability. But the force of the druid's blow easily broke through it. In the past, no one had ever been able to break her shield so easily. After all, she was one of the strongest awakened on Earth. This confirmed her speculation that the guy was irregular, and for that reason alone, he was stronger than her. When the shield shattered, the girl was thrown aside, and while she was on her feet, Suho was already running to strike. But the girl extended her palm in front of his face and said that she was giving up. The druid was upset because the fun was just beginning, but the girl didn't want to continue the fight, no matter how much he urged her. She then told him that since she had lost, she was bringing the unconscious guy back to the exam and was ready to fulfill his one wish. Suho asked if there were any girls on Earth as strong as her or stronger than her, and Soo-young said probably not, and then the guy said that in that case, he would choose her. She didn't understand what he meant, and then with a penchant for wolf-like behavior, he began to explain that they were both the strongest individuals, which meant they would have strong offspring, so he wanted to mate with her. Such indecent behavior embarrassed the girl. She yelled at the guy, slapped him, and ran out of the hall. He didn't understand her reaction, because he had forgotten that in the human world, it was wrong to offer to continue their species together so easily. The moment the girl slapped the guy's face, Dong-soo woke up, and he didn't understand the reason why the druid was slapped, and then the inspector ran away, and how he himself was able to pass out from the first slap. He was very upset after all. He had paid money to enter, and now he was so easily thrown out of the exam without even passing the first stage. But Suho told him that he was not expelled. The whole incident was recorded on a hidden camera located at the ceiling of the room. The video was watched by the chief examiner, who was shocked that this was the first time Soo-young had lost a fight to someone.